Hey everyone, Callie here again. Today I want to talk about some cards that we just got recently revealed on Pokebeach for the new Night Wanderer set. And I really want to focus in on how these cards I think are specifically good in the Gym Leader Challenge format. My local league, we play a lot of Gym Leader Challenge, and I really like to always look at what kind of cool cards are we going to get for new Gym Leader Challenge decks. If you don't know what Gym Leader Challenge is, I'd encourage you to head over to gymleaderchallenge.com. It's kind of a format that was popularized by Andrew Mahone and other people over at Tree Gym. It's a great way to be able to play the Pokemon TCG if you're maybe a little bit tired of standard. So first card I'm kind of interested here is this Galvantula that we've got coming out. It's a grass type with 100 HP. It's got that Compound Eyes ability. If your opponent's active Pokemon has any abilities, attacks this Pokemon uses deal 50 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And then for a grass and a colorless, it's got Shocking Web, does 50 damage, plus if this energy has any lightning energy attached, does 80 more damage. So already off the bat, if you want to just put two energies on this thing, you're potentially doing 100 damage attacking into anything that has a ability, which if you play any Gym Leader Challenge, there is a ton of Pokemon that everybody is running with abilities. So there's a pretty good chance that this stage 1 is mostly for 2 energy hitting for 100, which isn't the worst in GLC. It's really that ability to attach a lightning energy to give it that 80 more damage that I think gives this maybe some potential. You are then at that point potentially hitting for 180 if you're hitting into an ability Pokemon, or even just 130, which again for 2 energy is not too bad in GLC. I do think this card is not potentially amazing, this is not one that I think is going to be slotted into every single grass deck, but you can maybe build something kind of fun around this thing and do some damage with this. I really feel like it's this lightning energy requirement that ultimately is going to hold this one back from maybe being like the most amazing attacker in Grass GLC. Sticking with grass here for a second, I think this Decidueye is another one that's got some potential. So it's a stage 2 with 150 HP, and for 1 colorless, you can do Feather Stock, draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. Not a bad way to kind of refresh your hand if you are maybe kind of breaking a little bit. Obviously not the best attack on a stage 2, you probably won't really want to be set up by that point, but you can get in some awkward situations, especially in GLC. So there can be instances where maybe this gets you out of a weird situation. But I think really what makes me interested about this card is that Strong Shot attack. It's 170 damage for 1 energy. You do have to discard a grass energy from your hand, which I think holds it back a little bit for sure, but 170 damage for 1 energy technically is really strong in GLC, and it's not that difficult to be able to recover energy back from your discard. Something I do think maybe holds this back a little bit is there's not any absolutely amazing Rowlets or Dotrix that you can pair this thing with. There is this Rowlet with the Sky Circus. Birdkeeper's not a terrible card, so you can take advantage of this ability if you played Birdkeeper from your hand during your turn. Ignore all energy costs of this Pokemon's attack, and then you can kind of snipe something for 60 damage. Can be a good way to maybe set up some damage early, or snipe off a really particularly weak support Pokemon that somebody's got on their bench while you're kind of setting up towards that late game. Again, not amazing. It doesn't necessarily synergize specifically with this Decidueye, but something kind of run if you were going to do that one. I can't really say there's any great Dartrix, though, that you run with it. I'd probably go with the Sharp Blade Quill one, just because that attack's probably a little bit better than most, just again, kind of synergize again with that Rowlet just a little bit, but nothing amazing here. So another card that I don't think necessarily is going to be absolutely amazing in the format, but I do think has some potential to make its way into some decks and be kind of a fun card to play with. Sticking with grass here, a card that I think is actually going to be potentially amazing is this Tapu Bolo. So this is a basic Pokemon with 140 HP, and then for 2 grass and 2 colorless, it's got Wood Hammer to deal 220 damage, but this Pokemon then does 30 damage to itself. 140 damage or 140 HP is not bad in GLC. You can buff that up with, things like Fighting Fury Belts, Bravery Charms, Luxurious Capes, tons of ways that you can give this thing some more HP to make it a little bit more tanky. But it's this attack that I think we really care about here. Yes, 4 energy is a lot, but so many grass GLC decks run this Venusaur with the Jungle Totem. That's for each basic grass energy attached to your Pokemon, provides 2 grass energy instead. Can't apply more than one of that. Not really relevant for GLC. But what you're really talking about then is for 2 energy, you are attacking for 220 damage, which in a format like GLC, you are knocking out just about everything. The only thing you're not quite knocking out is a Whale Lord, especially if it's got that pot helmet on it. That thing can be kind of insane. But again, this is a great card that's going to be knocking out basically anything in the format that you can make as a nice attacker. I feel like that's one of the problems that Grass has in GLC is it's so evolution reliant, and it doesn't have a lot of great basics to kind of get it going if some of those evolutions start getting knocked out. Ultimately, a card that's still vulnerable if they do knock out your Venusaur or you can't get that set up. But again, I do feel like this is something that's probably worth slotting into a lot of those decks that are accelerating energy in and getting more value from them with Venusaur. Moving over to Psychic, there's a couple Pokemon that I want to talk about here, and it's this Dusclops and Dusknoir. I really want to look at them together, but let's just start with this Dusclops real quick. So this is a 90 HP stage 1 with that Cursed Bomb ability. Once during your turn, you may put 5 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. If you place any damage counters in this way, this Pokemon is knocked out. Then it's got 2 Psychic energies to do Will-O-Wisp for 50 damage. That attack is obviously not really what we care about here. And just to kind of look at the Dusknoir real quick, it's got a similar style of ability because this is really what we care about on both of these for the most part. So on the Dusknoir, you've got the 160 HP stage 2 with that Cursed Bomb ability. Once during your turn, you may put 13 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. If you place any damage counters in this way, this Pokemon is knocked out. Then it's got for 2 Psychic and 1 Colorless, Shadowbind does 150 damage. To your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. Not a bad attacker, with that 150 damage for 3 energy. Again, there's ways to maybe reduce that also in Psychic. But what we ultimately, again, care about here is these abilities that we've got on this Dusknoir and this Dusclops. So, again, if you play a lot of GLC, there is some incredible Psychic spread decks. If you play Standard as well, you're probably familiar with Lost Box with that Lost Mine Sableye, where if you've got 10 cards in your Lost Zone, for 1 Psychic energy, you can spread 12 damage counters around however you want. Kind of a crazy card for Standard, and there is some good Lost Zone decks that you can play with Psychic and GLC as well. Psychic Spread already has a lot of amazing tools. These are another thing that they can potentially slot into their decks as another way to kind of pick off some stuff. During a turn, they don't even have to use an attack for this one. So they can pick off something, set up something maybe for a Sableye, spread a lot more damage, and really kind of win the game from there. It's like, yeah, it does come with a heavy downside. It does knock out the Pokemon, so your opponent does take a prize, but you're obviously only activating this ability in a situation where it's going to really benefit you and setting you up to potentially either win the game or get so far ahead that you're going to, probably ultimately win just very, very quickly. So there is a Duskull in this set, probably not the one that I would run. First meetup attack is not relevant at all in GLC. 30 damage is not that good either. 60 HP is fine in GLC. There's a lot of spread, so more HP is not bad. But I would probably pair it with this Spirit-Born Evolution Duskull. This has, once during your turn, you may discard 3 cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for a card that evolves from this Pokemon and put it onto this Pokemon to evolve it, and then shuffle your deck. So it's a way to either maybe in the early game get into that Dusclops a little bit faster, or maybe in the late game kind of get into it, immediately pop up this ability, spread 5 damage counters around, and then maybe potentially win the game or take a critical prize card or couple prize cards. So again, probably the one that I would pair with. Also, that Ominous Knives is not terrible attack either. Like, I don't think there's an amazing Duskull. Really, you can make an argument, I think, for a lot of different ones. I mean, this 40 HP is kind of, not the best. It is a little bit vulnerable, but again, probably the one that I think is the best one to run if you're going to run kind of this spread combo that you can do with this Dusknoir and Duskull. Moving on to Fighting, a card that I think is looking very good, and something I'm kind of excited about in general is I feel like we're finally getting some good Fighting GLC cards. Fighting has always been one of those types that's kind of on the weaker side when it comes to GLC. It doesn't have a lot of good support Pokemon, doesn't honestly have a lot of good supporters or item cards for it specifically, but in the last couple of sets we've been getting some good looking cards for Fighting, like that Okidogi that just came out recently, and this Blood Moon Ursaluna seems to be following that trend. So this is a 150 HP basic, which is phenomenal in GLC. There's a lot of HP, 150 HP basics that people run in GLC, and this is a great one to add to that list. And it's got this rule of thumb ability. Once during your turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may attach 2 fighting energies from your hand to this Pokemon. So it's got some built-in energy acceleration to make it be able to do this attack a little bit easier, which, to read it real quick, for 2 fighting and a colorless, you've got Mud Bite, and it's 100 damage plus. This attack does 30 more damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So again, this is a great card that I think is definitely good in GLC. Being able to accelerate those fighting energies into play helps fighting a lot. Fighting is, again, another type that I feel like really struggles with a lot of basics. Their basics have high energy costs or not great damage for the amount of energy that you need to dedicate to them. It doesn't have a lot of good ways to accelerate energy into play that are easy to do. So to have this, to be able to potentially just plop it down, is just absolutely phenomenal. Great ways to kind of play this, get that Professor's Letter, find 2 energies from your deck, obviously fighting energies, play this thing down, boom, you've got 2 energies in play, attached for turn. This thing's already swinging potentially on your first turn, going second, and already doing 100 damage, which, again, it might be even KOing a lot of different support Pokemon that might be in the active from your opponent's first turn. There are also a lot of good ways to be able to capitalize on this Mud Bite ability. There's many times where you might not be quite KOing your opponent's Pokemon anyway, or you're putting a little bit of damage on. Great partner for this might be this Ting-Lu that just came out recently. So that's got that ground Crasher attack, which does 30 damage to the active, and then if you discard a Stadium in play, you can do 30 damage to each of their benched Pokemon as well. So again, you're potentially then setting up all kinds of damage from Blood Moon Ursaluna to be able to do an additional damage with this thing. Again, that 30 damage from the Ting-Lu that it's putting on there, since it's doing 30 more for each damage counter that's on there, you're getting close to kind of getting to numbers that are basically knocking out everything. So you're doing 190 with this attack, plus that 30. Again, you're basically KOing everything with just, a couple of energies. Moving on to Dark, another card that I'm pretty excited about, partially because I'm just a big fan of the Crobat line in general. I don't know, there's just something about Zubat that I really like, but you've got this 130 HP Stage 2, it's with that Shadow Envoy ability. Once during your turn, if you played Janna's Secret Technique from your hand during its turn, you may draw cards until you have 8 cards from your hand. I'm going to put up the Janna's Secret Technique here as well, just so you can kind of see what that looks like. But that's a way to already be accelerating energy into play, and then drawing cards off of it. It's turning a supporter, that's maybe a little questionable, at least in GLC, because there's a lot of other ways to accelerate energy, into potentially a fantastic one. Because now you're accelerating energy and maybe drawing 7 cards, probably more likely 3 to 4 in most cases. But again, a way to be able to draw some cards, accelerate some energy, potentially fantastic little combo, and not a bad attack on this Crobat as well. For a dark and a colorless, you can do 120 damage. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. Put 2 damage counters on it instead of 1 between turns. There are a lot of poison GLC decks running around already. People running with stuff like Burbank City Gym, the Krogunk, so many different cards to buff your poison damage. So this is another way to give you a pretty cheap attacker that's got a built-in incentive to run, a great supporter that's accelerating energy into play and drawing you cards. So this is a potentially fun little card to play with, which, by the way, also has Free Retreat, in case you didn't notice that over there. So that Free Retreat is pretty nice on this Crobat. Fortunately, it does compete a little bit with the Crobat from Silver Tempest, which a lot of people currently run, but it allows you to potentially take more prize cards if you are KOing with that attack, which Poison is kind of trying to do that, so ultimately you might still want to use that other Crobat better. But I like that there's maybe another option that you could potentially go with. Good pairings for this one as well. So you've got the Discreet Draw Golbat, which people typically use when they're running these Crobats. A way to just draw a couple cards when you evolve from your Zubat. Not a bad way to get a couple more cards in your hand and kind of keep going with your strategy. And then usually the Zubat people pair it with is this one with Free Retreat, again from Silver Tempest. There's maybe an argument for some other ones. I think there's one that lets you look at your opponent's hand if it's in the active spot once per turn, but the free retreat is probably really what you want to go with. Sticking with dark here for a second, we've got this Malamar, which is stage 1, that's got 120 HP. Then what we really care about here is this first attack. For 1 darkness energy, you've got Conspiracy Tentacles. Switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to be active. This attack does 120 damage to the new active Pokemon. If you did not play Xeric's Plan from your hand in this turn, this attack does nothing. So I'm going to put the Xeric's Plan up again, but it's basically a supporter that forces your opponent to discard, I believe, down to 3 cards left in their hand. They do get to choose which ones they're going to keep. So it's a way to potentially empty out your opponent's hand while maybe trapping them in the active. This is not something that I think is necessarily going to be the most amazing thing in the world, but there is some potential here to maybe like stall out for a little while playing a lot of hand disruption. There's obviously a lot of good options in GLC for hand disruption. You've got your reset stamps, obviously this new Xeric's Plan that's coming out as well. So you can maybe play more a control-y style with this versus Seeker, Cynthia and Caitlyn. Lots of ways to recover those supporters from the discard as well. So you can be potentially playing that Xeric's Plan multiple times. Even if they manage to get out of it next turn, maybe just Xeric's Plan them again the next turn and kind of keep going from there. So again, not something I think is going to like take over probably, but maybe a fun thing to kind of play around with in a more control-y style dark deck. Alright, moving on to metal. I want to highlight this Copper Raja real quick. There's already a pretty good Copper Raja in GLC, but this is another one that's maybe worth considering. This is a 200 HP stage 1, which is a phenomenal amount of HP in GLC, so not bad there. But it's got this interesting Gargantuan body ability. As long as this Pokemon is in your active spot, your opponent can't play any stadium cards from your hand. So why I like that, for one, already a lot of stadiums that people are wanting to play in GLC that are just amazing. So if you can shut off their ability to play stadiums, that's already good. But what I think really matters here is the fact that this is helping protect your own stadiums in play. Obviously, one of the ways to be able to bounce stadiums is to play your own. If your opponent can't do that, then yours is going to potentially stick around a lot better. They can obviously play stuff like Field Blower. That's played in almost every single GLC deck. There's still ways to get around it, but it's limiting the options that they have. You can maybe get this into the active after they've already played that Field Blower, and then plop down a stadium that you want to keep into play, and keep going from there. There's lots of good stadiums to pair with this. There's a new stadium that came out recently that makes it so you take 30 less damage from attack, or your metal Pokemon take 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. There's Crystal Cave to heal 30 damage off of your metal Pokemon. Again, multiple really good options for you to potentially lock this down, turn this 200 HP stage 1 into kind of essentially a 230 HP if you're using the minus damage one. Put some things like Pot Helmet on this thing as well, and you're talking about kind of effective 260 HP. Like, this card has, I think, some real potential. One thing that sets it back a little bit is this attack. So for 3 metal and a colorless, it's got Nose Lariat. That's a 130 damage plus. You can do 100 more damage, just kind of as your choice. There's no qualifier there. It does have the downside if you do make that choice that you cannot attack next turn with this Pokemon. So again, a very powerful attack. This is another thing where 130 is not bad in and of itself in GLC. Again, that's knocking out a lot of support Pokemon or Pokemon that are still evolving. And then being able to do that 100 more on command, you're knocking out pretty much everything at that point, while locking out your ability from your opponent to maybe play some stadiums that might make things a little bit more difficult for you, make you less tanky. I think this is a really potentially cool card. Again, maybe held back by this energy cost, but we do have ways to accelerate energy with metal now. They're becoming easier to do. Number one is the Metang that we just got. So that's got that Metal Maker ability where you look the top 4, attach any amount of metal energy that you find there to your Pokemon in any way that you like. Great way to be able to accelerate energy. You've got Magnezone that can potentially help you a little bit. You've got Metal Saucer, which can maybe help you a little bit. So it might take a minute to get this thing going, but I think it might be a powerhouse if you can really manage to pull this thing off. Moving on to Dragon, there's a couple of cards that I want to talk about that I am super excited about, and that is this Haxorus is this first one. So this is a 170 HP stage 2, already pretty nice HP on a stage 2, and then for 1 fighting energy, it's got Axe Down. If your opponent's active Pokemon has any special energy attached, it is knocked out. Doesn't matter how much damage it has, how much HP it's got. This is a phenomenal attack. Everybody runs so much special energy in GLC. So this is essentially just reads 1 fighting energy, KO basically anything you want from almost any deck. Obviously, that's not totally true. There are some decks that run a little bit less special energy, and there are things like the Unfazed Fat Snorlax that would get around stuff like this because it is protected from the effects of attacks. But again, this is something that's pretty easy to knock out most stuff that you're going to want to be able to knock out with it. And then, hey, for times that that's not going to work, for 1 fighting and a metal, you've got Dragon Pulse, and this is 230 damage. You do have to discard the top 3 cards of your deck, but for that amount of damage, who cares? Like, you can knock out, again, pretty much literally anything in the GLC format. This is a phenomenal attacker in Dragon decks that I'm really looking forward to seeing come into play. And it's getting some good partners to be able to pair it up with. So you've got this Fracture. This has that Unnerve ability on that stage 1, middle evolution. Whenever your opponent plays an item or supporter card from your hand, prevent all effects of that card done to this Pokemon. So, you know, people are seeing this thing come into play. They're worried about your Haxorus. They want to kill this thing as fast as possible. Well, you know what? Too bad. Your Guzma, your Blast, your Counter Catcher, all your different ways that you're using Gust, these are not going to affect your Fracture. He cannot be affected by any of those cards. So he can just sit on your bench and be protected, ready to go whenever you need him to be ready. Also got a couple good Axe News, that basic Pokemon that you can pair with it as well. Ultimately, the option I would probably go with is, why not run the Axe New that also has Unnerve? You know, can you see them put this thing down and they want to kill it ASAP? You make it more difficult for them to be able to do that, where both the basic and stage 1 have the ability to be unaffected by your opponent's items and supporters, making it very hard to get an early KO on this thing before you're eventually able to get into Haxorus. Another maybe option is the Ultra Evolution Axe New. Probably not the one that I would go with, but this does have the potential to allow you to accelerate a little bit quicker into that Fraxor, which, again, maybe makes it another option. So next up we have Kyurem. And this is an interesting card. Some people might disagree with me on this one, but I do think this is one that maybe has some potential, maybe has an argument to work its way into some Dragon decks in GLC. So what does it got here? This is a 130 HP basic with that anti-plasma ability. If your opponent has a card with Colress in its name in their discard pile, the attack cost of this Pokemon's Triforce is a colorless instead. Let's go ahead and read that Triforce ability. So this is normally 2 water, 2 metal, and a colorless. Discard all energy attached to this Pokemon. This attack does 120 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. So then you might be looking at this initially and being like, oh, how is this potentially good? What are you even talking about? That's 5 energy that you have to discard to, okay, yeah, do 110 damage. Again, not bad in GLC in particular to 3 Pokemon, but that is a huge cost. Where are you getting all that energy from? And then what are you doing afterwards as you discarded it? Well, again, that's where that anti-plasma ability comes into play. The fact that this has a card with Colress in its name in the discard pile is the reason why I feel like this has some actual potential to be played in Dragon GLC. There's actually 3 pretty good cards that are run pretty regularly in GLC, all with Colress in their name. First off, you've got the OG Colress. This is shuffle your hand into your deck and then draw cards for each Pokemon on the bench, including your opponent. So, you know, ideally it's drawing you 10 cards. Most of the time it's not actually drawing you that many. You know, maybe it's drawing you more like 5 to 7 is kind of what you're hopefully more shooting for realistically. But this is played in a ton of GLC decks. You also have Colress Experiment. I talked earlier about the damage spread that people were doing with Lost Zone decks and Psychic. Colress Experiment is not a bad card in general, so that's seeing its way into certain types of decks. So again, there's another Colress. Then last but not least, we've got a new Colress. which also has a pretty good effect. So this is search your deck for a stadium and any energy. Not bad, especially in GLC. Like there maybe are arguably other better options, but I do think this is a card that a lot of people are likely to play. And the fact that there's 3 pretty viable Colruses, or 2 of them that already are being played in different types of decks, one of which is, again, being slotted into most decks at this point, and you got a new one coming out, I really feel like there's some potential, to maybe slot this thing in and get some pretty cool kills with this, because at that point, you're just for 1 colorless doing 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. And that Colress is going to stay in the discard, unless they Versus Seeker out and then never play it again, which is kind of a great way to make them waste their Versus Seeker potentially at that point. You've got Rescue Stretcher, Revive, lots of ways to get this thing back really easy and then just pop 1 energy on it anytime they maybe slip up and replay that Colress. Moving on to our trainer cards. First one that I want to at least mention, though I do feel like it's maybe a little bit weak in GLC specifically, is this Nightly Stretcher. So this is choose 1, put 1 Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand, or put 1 basic energy from your discard into your hand. Again, not an amazing card, especially in GLC where we've got things like Rescue Stretcher, but maybe if there are some decks that are expecting a Pokemon to die a lot and they need ways to recover it, maybe worth considering, but probably not the most amazing trainer that we're seeing. One card I am kind of interested in is this Binding Mochi. So I like poison decks a lot. I talked a lot about poison earlier when we looked at that Crobat. So this is the attacks of the poison Pokemon this card is attached to do 40 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So yes, you need to have your own Pokemon be poisoned, which does give you kind of an extra step and is softening up your own Pokemon. But 40 more damage, that's not bad. I do feel like one of the struggles that poison decks have is sometimes they just can't quite hit their numbers. Like even with the boosts that they're getting, they're maybe always off by 10 damage, 20 damage. I'm not sure exactly where this fits in specifically, but I do feel like there is some potential with this 40 damage to maybe find its way into some poison-based decks or decks that poison themselves. Next up is a card, another tool card that I want to talk about, Power Hourglass. This is another one that I don't think is amazing, but I think is maybe fun to play around with. So this is at the end of your turn, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, you may attach 1 basic energy card from your discard pile to that Pokemon. So again, maybe this is something where you've got a little bit more of a setup deck, maybe a tanky Pokemon like that Caparaja that you're maybe healing or is taking less damage that you want sitting in the active to kind of stall your opponent a little bit, and maybe it's another way to accelerate some energy. Again, not the ideal use for it. I think where maybe this has the most chance to be a little bit of fun card to play with is the new Brambleghast card that came out kind of recently. This is a card that, with that ability for each prize card your opponent has taken, it's got more HP, its attack, it flips more coins, potentially does more damage, based on energy attached. So again, maybe a fun way to kind of get more and more energy to this Brambleghast to go even more all in on this little thing. Definitely not a card in that I'm seeing really breaking open stuff, but again, maybe something kind of fun to play around with, and eventually maybe somebody finds something really good to do with it. Next up, we've got Colress Tenacity. I talked a little bit about this before when I was talking about that new Kyurem card. This is the new Colress. So again, it's search your deck for a stadium card and an energy card, reveal them, put them in your hand, shuffle your deck. Again, pretty nice card in GLC. There, again, are other options. You've got Guzma and Hala, which people tend to play, but that does require you to discard cards to be able to get that energy card, to be able to get that stadium card. It does obviously have the option to get you the tool as well, while this doesn't, but this is just get a stadium and an energy. Again, any energy, but there's a ton of great energy and great stadiums to play in GLC. I think this is absolutely something that a lot of decks will run, just to be able to get those energies and stadiums a little bit more reliably. Next trainer I want to highlight is Janus Secret Technique. Again, another one I talked about earlier, but just to look at it a little bit more closely, this is choose up to 2 of your dark Pokemon. For each of those Pokemon, search your deck for a basic dark energy card and attach it to that Pokemon. Shuffle your deck. If you attach any energy to your active Pokemon this way, it is now poisoned. So, again, great way to accelerate some energies. I was talking about this before. you can choose the same Pokemon, 2 different Pokemon, and then you go find them from your deck. You don't need to set them up in your discard like something with Dark Patch or other ways to accelerate energy typically do. Like, yeah, you do have to poison your active, but maybe this is where that Mochi tool comes into play to be able to do 40 more damage when your active is poisoned. I think this is a card that's probably going to find its way into a lot of dark decks. There's already turbo dark decks that people run that just kind of go off really, really hard, really, really early. This is maybe another way to power up Guzzlord and then buff him up with that Mochi attack to be able to take 2 prize cards even easier than you already can. I think this is a card that is really giving Dark a lot of potential in GLC and is maybe going to be absolutely amazing. So next up is this Cassiopeia. There's probably lots of people that will figure out great ways to run this card. It's one of those things that I see people play in various decks and standard and other types of formats in their decks. I don't like stuff like this personally. I don't know. I guess I'm just not smart enough to be able to play my hand out. I feel like there's a lot of times people will try to run stuff like Maxie's Ball Trick as well, which just is difficult to pull off. This is a similar type of thing. So again, just to read it real quick, you can only use this card if it's the last one in your hand, but then it does allow you to search up 2 cards. Again, I don't know. Maybe this is one of those cards where you get late game, in or something into 1 card or into low cards and then you draw it. But I just feel like there's a lot of times you run a lot of supporters in GLC decks and it's difficult to get down to 1 last card. So I don't love this card, but I do think this is one that's got some potential to find its way into some decks and be pretty good. Next up, we've got Zorasix Plan. So I talked about this one as well, but just to read it, your opponent discards cards from their hand until they have 3 cards left in their hand. This is potentially a bit of a toxic card for people to be able to play. I've got some people at my locals that like to play a lot of hand disruption already. They will probably love to play around with this card, put it in their decks, and be even more annoying than they already are. Imagine somebody turn 1 Marshadows you, down to 4 cards already. This is not a card that I'm totally looking forward to seeing, but will probably be pretty good in a lot of different decks. Then last but not least, another card that I don't think is amazing, but has some potential in certain types of decks that maybe need a little bit of setup. So this is Nighttime Academy. Once during each player's turn, that player may put a card from their hand on top of their deck. So again, there are certain uses for cards like this. Can protect you against things like Iono or Marnie that a lot of different people play. Maybe put a critical combo piece back on top of your deck, so if you were expecting your opponent to play that, then it's still going to be there, it won't be shuffled away. Or in some cases, there are cards that allow you to, reveal that top card, and then if it's something that you can put it into play. Good example of that would be the top entry Metagross, which is played in a lot of metal decks. Got it in your hand, put that right back on top. Oh, hey, look, I just drew this on my next turn, and surprise, surprise, it's my Metagross. I'll put that guy in play, draw some cards, and have him going. So again, I do think this is a card that can probably find its way into certain types of deck, but again, needs that certain type of deck to really, really go off. And that's all the cards that I wanted to highlight that we got revealed from the upcoming Night Wanderer set. Again, this is a set that I think has a lot of really cool cards for GLC specifically. Really excited to see how this might change up some current decks, or maybe even help build some new decks with some of these cards. But what do you think? Any cards that you disagree with my opinions on here, or any ones you feel like I missed? Let me know down in the comments below. Aside from that, if you liking the content like this, I do a lot of reviews of cards for both Standard and for GLC, as well as using my experience as a Stage 1 judge to be able to talk about different card interactions, a little bit how PTCGL doesn't always get things right. So again, give me a like and subscribe if you're liking that kind of content, and I'll see you in the next one.